At 16, I was cast out overnight after my sister painted me as the villain, and my father never questioned it. A decade later, the truth finally surfaced, and now my mother wants a fresh start I'll never give. I'm writing because something that I thought was buried a long time ago has been dragged back into my life, and I can't shake the feeling that there's more going on than what I'm being told. I'm 27 now. I've been financially independent since my early 20s, stable job, quiet life, very low contact with my family. That wasn't always the plan, but it became the only way I knew how to live after what happened when I was 16. When I was 16, I was removed from my family home in the span of a few hours. There was no long argument, no investigation, no discussion where I got to explain myself. My older sister made an accusation against me that was framed vaguely but seriously enough that it immediately destroyed my credibility. It was the kind of accusation that didn't need details to do damage. Nothing was reported to the police. No school counselor was involved. My father decided I was done, and that was it. I still remember how fast everything moved. I was told to pack a bag. I was told I couldn't stay there anymore. My father didn't ask questions. He didn't look conflicted. He acted like he'd been waiting for a reason. My mother didn't defend me. She didn't argue with him. She stood there and cried, which at the time I thought meant she believed me, but felt powerless. Looking back, I'm not so sure. Within a day, I was sent to live with one of my mother's relatives, someone who made it clear from the start that I was an inconvenience. My phone stopped buzzing. Friends stopped answering. Extended family cut contact without explanation. Whatever my sister said, it worked. I became the problem everyone quietly agreed not to touch. I finished school early, worked whatever jobs I could get, and left. I didn't blow up my life. I didn't spiral publicly. I just disappeared from theirs. Over time, I built something steady for myself, and I accepted that my family wasn't part of that future. My mother would occasionally send a message on holidays or birthdays, always surface level, never addressing what happened. I kept my responses polite and short. I didn't ask questions I knew wouldn't be answered. A couple of weeks ago, that changed. My mother reached out and said she needed to talk because she had learned the truth about what happened back then. She said she was carrying guilt and that it wasn't fair what was done to me. She wanted to meet and clear the air. I said no. Not aggressively, not emotionally, just no. I told her I wasn't interested in reopening something that had already cost me my family once. I thought that would be the end of it. 2 days later, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I didn't open the door right away. I checked first. She was alone. No father, no sister. That's the only reason I let her in. I told her from the start that this wasn't a reconciliation and that she wouldn't be staying long. She told me my sister had lied. Not exaggerated, not misunderstood, but fabricated the accusation entirely. She said my father reacted out of fear and anger and took it too far. She said she regretted not stopping it. She talked about stress, about protecting the family, about doing what felt safest at the time. A lot of soft language that didn't really line up with the consequences. What stood out to me wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. It felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced the order of the facts, but not the accountability. She didn't ask how I survived. She didn't ask what it cost me. She kept circling back to the idea of moving forward. Then she asked me to reconnect. Not privately, but visibly. To be seen with the family again. To help heal things publicly. To give people a chance to see that everything was okay now. That's when something in my gut dropped. If this was really about guilt, why now? If this was about truth, why show up instead of respecting my refusal? And if this was about me, why did it feel like I was being positioned rather than apologized to? Before she left, I asked her if there was anything else she wasn't telling me. She said no, immediately. Too immediately. Since then, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that this isn't just emotional cleanup. Something about the timing, the urgency, and the focus on appearances feels off. I've lived long enough without them to know when I'm being pulled back for a reason, and I don't think that reason is remorse. I don't know what I'm looking for by posting this. Maybe perspective. Maybe confirmation that I'm not being paranoid. All I know is that this feels wrong in a way that goes beyond old wounds being reopened. Update 1. I wanted to come back with an update because a lot of people told me to trust my instincts and not dismiss how off this whole thing felt. I didn't expect what I found, but I also wasn't surprised, which I think says a lot about how little trust I actually had left. After my mother showed up and left, I sat with that conversation for a few days. I replayed it more than I want to admit. Not the emotional parts, but the practical ones. The timing, the urgency, The focus on appearances instead of accountability. The way she kept steering things toward me being visible again rather than asking what I needed. It didn't feel like guilt, it felt like positioning. I didn't confront her. I didn't reach out to anyone else in my family. I didn't announce anything. Instead, I did something that felt extreme at the time, but now feels necessary. I hired a private investigator. This wasn't about revenge or digging up dirt for the sake of it. I didn't go into this wanting to blow anyone's life up. I went into it because I needed to know whether letting my mother back into my life carried any actual risk. I spent most of my teenage years being blamed for something I didn't do. I wasn't about to walk back into that kind of situation blind. The investigator I hired was licensed and came recommended through a friend who works in finance. I told them up front that I wasn't looking for anything dramatic. I just wanted to know what my family had been doing recently, legally and financially, and whether my name had come up anywhere it shouldn't have. The first few days were quiet. Then things started coming back, piece by piece, and the pattern started to form. My father has been moving assets around, not slowly or casually, but in a way that looks rushed. Property and savings that had been in his name for decades were recently transferred into my mother's name. At the same time, a limited liability company was formed that's tied to my sister's ex-husband, not loosely tied, directly connected. The company doesn't do anything obvious, no public-facing business, no clear purpose, just a clean structure sitting there. My sister, who I've been told for years is barely holding things together, has been involved in multiple questionable insurance claims over the last couple of years. Nothing charged yet, but enough red flags that insurers flagged her file internally. On top of that, there's an ongoing internal investigation at her workplace related to financial discrepancies. Again, nothing public, but not nothing either. Then there's the legal side. My parents recently contacted a lawyer who specializes in white-collar criminal defense, not estate planning, not family law, not mediation. Very specific, very expensive legal representation. That alone might not mean much, but paired with everything else, it stopped feeling coincidental. What really made my stomach drop was when the investigator told me that my name has been mentioned. Not casually, not as an afterthought. My name came up in consultations, as context, as history, as part of a narrative. At the same time all of this has been happening, my family has been quietly telling people that I'm coming back around, that there were misunderstandings when I was younger, that things were complicated back then, that I'm reconnecting. None of these people reached out to me directly. I only know because the investigator confirmed it through secondary contacts, and because a distant relative messaged me asking if it was true that everything was resolved now. It started to feel familiar in the worst way. The same vague language, the same soft framing, the same idea that if you blur things enough, people stop asking questions. The investigator also found drafts of emails my father wrote but never sent. These weren't emotional letters, they were practical, planning language. He referred to me as the estranged one, as the problem child, as someone who had been unstable in the past. It was the same framing my sister used when she was a teenager, just cleaned up and more strategic. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't about fixing the past, this was about using it. The accusation that got me thrown out at 16 didn't just isolate me socially. It created a paper trail. It justified my absence. It made it easier to talk about me like I was unreliable without anyone pushing back. That narrative never went away. It just went quiet once I stopped being useful. Now suddenly, I'm useful again. I don't think my mother showed up because she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I think she showed up to see whether I was still pliable, to see if I would step back into the role they had already assigned me without knowing it. I haven't responded to her since. I haven't confronted anyone. I haven't tipped my hand. Right now, I'm watching and documenting. I'm making sure my name stays where it belongs and nowhere else. I don't think they want me back because they're sorry. Update 2. I wasn't sure if I was going to post this update yet, but enough has happened that I feel like I need to get it out somewhere before it all escalates further. A lot of you warned me after my last update that what I was describing sounded less like family drama and more like a setup. You were right. After the initial findings from the private investigator, I asked them to dig deeper. Not wider, deeper. I didn't want speculation or assumptions. I wanted documents, timelines, and anything that tied my name to things I never agreed to. At that point, I wasn't operating off fear anymore. I was operating off pattern recognition. What came back made it very clear why my mother suddenly found her conscience. My father and sister are both connected to an ongoing investigation involving financial fraud. This isn't a rumor or an internal workplace issue. This is the kind of thing where outside agencies are involved and where people start quietly lawyering up before anything becomes public. Forged signatures are part of it, so is money being moved through accounts that don't match declared income. Some of this goes back years, overlapping with the time I was no contact and had no visibility into anything happening in that household. The most unsettling part is that my identity was used during that time, not actively, like someone stealing my credit card, but passively. Forms listing me as a beneficiary, documents referencing me as a signer, assets that were structured in a way that assumed my involvement without my knowledge. It wasn't enough to immediately pin everything on me, but it was enough to muddy the water if questions started being asked. That's when the bigger picture came together. The plan wasn't to drag me back into the family because they missed me. The plan was to reintroduce me publicly so my presence could explain inconsistencies. If I was back, then it would make sense that my name appeared on things. If we were healing, then it would make sense that past issues were complicated and messy. If I had a documented history of being unstable or problematic, then it would make sense if responsibility wasn't clear-cut. The accusation that got me kicked out at 16 wasn't just cruelty. It was groundwork. It painted me as unreliable, long before anyone needed a scapegoat. I don't think they planned this back then in detail, but they absolutely took advantage of it later. My mother's role in this became clearer too. She wasn't some unaware bystander who just found out the truth and panicked. She knew enough to understand the risk they were in, and she knew enough to realize that bringing me back into the picture could help them. Her visit wasn't about closure. It was a test. She needed to see if I was still emotionally reachable, if I would comply quietly, if I would accept vague apologies and play along for the sake of moving forward. I keep thinking about how careful she was not to bring my father or sister with her. At the time, I took that as decency. Now I see it as strategy. She needed to assess me without triggering immediate resistance. I haven't confronted her or anyone else. I don't plan to yet. Right now, I'm focused on making sure there is a clear line between me and whatever they've been doing. I've already retained a lawyer, not because I've been accused of anything, but because I refuse to wait until I am. I've also hired a forensic accountant to review everything the investigator uncovered and flag anything that could be misused later. This has been a strange emotional shift for me. I thought I would feel angry when I finally understood what was happening. Instead, I feel very calm. Not numb, but clear. The kind of clarity that comes when something ugly finally makes sense. A few people have asked why I don't just confront them and call it out. The answer is simple. People who are willing to sacrifice you once don't suddenly develop ethics when they're cornered. I'm not interested in dramatic confrontations or emotional closure. I'm interested in making sure I don't get pulled into legal consequences for things I didn't do. I've also stopped responding to extended family entirely. Some of them have started reaching out more now that the narrative of reconciliation is floating around. I don't correct them. I don't explain. Silence is safer right now. I know this sounds cold, but I don't feel conflicted about protecting myself. I already lost my family once because they chose convenience over truth. I'm not giving them a second opportunity to use me as damage control. Update 3. I waited longer than people probably expected before doing anything. That was on purpose. I didn't want this to look emotional or reactive, and I didn't want to give anyone a chance to say I was spiraling or acting out of spite. I needed everything clean, boring, and hard to argue with. LOL, sorry guys. Once my lawyer and the forensic accountant were fully looped in, things moved faster than I thought they would. Not because I pushed, but because the paper trail was already there. My family hadn't been careful. They'd been confident. For years, they operated under the assumption that I was gone, discredited, and unlikely to ever challenge anything tied to my name. That assumption did most of the work for me. The first thing I did was protect myself. I filed an identity fraud affidavit and froze my credit across the board. That part felt surreal, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so administrative. Sitting in an office, calmly explaining that my identity had been used without my knowledge during a period where I was effectively cut off from my family, made the whole situation feel less personal and more procedural. That shift helped. Once it's paperwork, it stops being about feelings. At the same time, my lawyer helped me submit everything I had to the investigators already looking into my father and sister. I didn't wait to be contacted. I didn't try to control the narrative verbally. I just provided documentation. Dates, copies, signatures that weren't mine, records showing I couldn't have been present when certain documents were allegedly signed. The goal wasn't to accuse anyone. It was to make it impossible for me to be included by default. The second part was harder. but necessary. For years, my extended family had only known one version of what happened when I was 16. I'd accepted that silence because I didn't think it mattered anymore. It turns out it mattered a lot. That old accusation wasn't just emotional damage, it was leverage. So I corrected the record, selectively and carefully. I sent a small number of people a packet of information, proof that the accusation was false, timestamps showing when it was fabricated, and documentation that directly contradicted the version they'd been told. I didn't add commentary. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't even ask for acknowledgement. I just made sure the truth existed outside of my head for the first time. Some people didn't respond at all. A few sent vague messages about needing time. One person said they wished they'd known sooner. I didn't follow up with any of them. That wasn't the point. The point was removing the usefulness of the lie. The third move happened almost quietly. The forensic accountant finalized a report that mapped out the asset transfers my father had made and how they intersected with documents bearing my name. When that report was handed over, those transfers stopped looking like family bookkeeping and started looking like obstruction. Again, I didn't need to say that. The numbers said it on their own. Around this time, the first cracks showed up on their end. My mother reached out in a way that felt less controlled than before. She wasn't asking to reconnect anymore. She was asking me to slow down, to reconsider, to think about how much damage this could do. That was the first time she acknowledged damage as something real, not abstract. It was also the first time she framed it as something happening to them, not something they caused. My father's messages followed a pattern. First, anger, then threats dressed up as concern, then apologies that didn't actually address anything specific. He never denied the documents. He never denied the transfers. He just kept insisting this didn't need to go this far, as if distance was a choice I was making instead of the outcome of his decisions. The last piece involved my sister's job. This was the part I thought about the longest, because I knew it would have immediate consequences. In the end, I didn't contact her employer directly. The evidence was submitted anonymously, but it was verifiable and already tied to an active investigation. Within days, she was placed on administrative leave. That was how I found out it had worked. Her response was the most predictable. She accused me of ruining everything. She said I was proving who I'd always been. She never said the accusation was true. She never said the documents were fake. She only talked about outcomes. That's what stood out the most to me through all of this. Once the facts were on the table, no one argued them anymore. They argued timing. They argued tone. They argued loyalty. They argued consequences. The truth itself was no longer up for debate. I'm not angry. I don't feel relieved either. What I feel is steady, focused, like I finally understand the rules of the situation I was dropped into as a kid, and I'm no longer playing blind. At this point, everything is in motion. I'm not pushing it and I'm not stopping it. I've done what I needed to do to make sure I'm not carrying someone else's mess on my back. Whatever happens next is the result of choices that weren't mine. Final update. I waited until everything was finished before writing this. Not because I was hoping for a different outcome, but because I didn't want to narrate things while they were still shifting. I needed it to be settled, closed. This is that point. The investigations wrapped faster once my involvement was formally separated from everything they were looking at. Once my name was no longer a question mark, the focus narrowed quickly. My father was charged with multiple counts tied to financial fraud, forged signatures, and obstruction related to the asset transfers. He took a plea after it became clear that fighting it would only expose more. He received a custodial sentence followed by restitution and a long list of restrictions that effectively ended his ability to manage finances for anyone but himself. Watching someone who always positioned himself as untouchable get reduced to court dates and conditions was strange, but not satisfying in the way people assume it would be. My sister didn't go to trial. She entered a plea negotiation once the evidence tied to her workplace and the broader fraud became part of the same picture. The false accusation from our childhood didn't carry legal consequences on its own, but it was referenced repeatedly as context. Not as drama, as pattern. That mattered more than I expected. She avoided jail time, but the plea came with penalties that followed her out of the courtroom and into every background check that would ever be run on her again. My mother was not charged. That part didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how quickly her position collapsed once she could no longer pretend she didn't know. Family members who had defended her for years stopped returning her calls. People who had ignored me suddenly wanted clarification. She lost access to the role she'd always played as the reasonable one in the middle. There was no replacement for it. The last time I heard from her directly was after sentencing. She didn't ask to reconcile. She asked if there was any chance I would speak on her behalf, privately, to explain that she'd been under pressure and didn't know how to stop what was happening. That was when I finally responded. I sent one message. Short, clear, no emotion attached to it. I told her she didn't get to ruin my life twice. I blocked the number immediately after. I didn't wait for a reply. After that, the extended family started reaching out. Some were vague. Some were overly apologetic. A few asked if I'd be willing to talk now that everything was over. I didn't respond to any of them. I realized something important during that stretch. None of them had reached out when I was 16. They were only comfortable contacting me now that there was no risk to them. That told me everything I needed to know. I changed my number, not out of panic, but out of preference. I moved a few months later, quietly, without announcing it to anyone connected to them. The move wasn't dramatic, it was practical. A different place, closer to work, with fewer shared memories attached to it. The kind of move you make when you're not running from something, just choosing where to stand. Seeing them face consequences didn't heal anything. What it did was remove the last remaining doubt that maybe I'd imagined how bad it was. I didn't. If anything, I underestimated how far they were willing to go. I don't think about my father much anymore. I don't wonder what my sister tells people now. I don't try to understand my mother's choices. I've learned that understanding isn't the same as excusing, and I don't owe anyone that labor. This is where I stop updating. There's nothing left to explain. The truth is out, the damage is contained, and the distance is permanent. That's not bitterness. That's boundaries, enforced too late, but held firmly now.